There is a Latin phrase, tempus fugit, time flies. Time flies. The bad news is just that time flies. The good news is, however, you're the pilot. In the words of the Apostle Paul in Ephesians 5 and verse 16, we are to redeem the time, or maybe your translation, something to the effect, make the most of every opportunity. With this being the end of a year, and Lord willing, our hearts and minds are already into a new year, the changing of the calendar, I wanted us to listen to what Jesus has to teach us, listen to what Jesus has to tell us in the Word. So if you'll find the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 25, we're going to go there to that text in just a moment. Matthew's Gospel, chapter 25. Our theme for the year 2024 has been disciples making disciples. And I don't think we can do any better than ending the year and our time together, listening to what Jesus has to say about our lives, about a perspective we should have. Not only how we should see our Lord, but how we should see and seize the opportunities that He gives. Good morning and welcome to all who are here, especially this being holiday time and travel time. We have visitors, we have new faces and new people that are with us this morning. And we do not want you to be overlooked in any way, especially if you're new to us, new to this community, new to this area, and you've just recently moved here and you're searching for a church home and family. Please allow us to answer any and all questions you may have about this church and what we're trying to do as a people of God in this place. We just want to know how we can serve God and glorify Him, but we want to also connect our lives to your life to know how we can help you and how we can serve you. So, to our visitors this morning, we are surely glad that you are here. If you're in the Gospel of Matthew, let's begin the text. Matthew 25, let's begin in verse 14. I'm reading from the New King James Version, Matthew 25, beginning in verse 14. For, Jesus says, the kingdom of heaven is like a man traveling to a far country who called his own servants and delivered his goods to them. And to one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to each according to his own ability. And immediately he went on a journey. And then he who had received the 5 talents went and traded with them and made another 5 talents. And likewise, he who had received 2 gained 2 more also. But he who had received 1 talent, he went and he dug in the ground and he hid his Lord's money. And after a long time, verse 19, the Lord of those servants came and settled accounts with each of them. So he who had received the 5 talents came and brought 5 other talents. And he said, Lord, you delivered to me 5 talents. Look, I have gained 5 more talents besides them. And the Lord said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. And he also, verse 22, who had received the 2 talents, came and said, Lord, you delivered to me 2 talents. Look, I have gained 2 more talents besides them. And his Lord said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. And then he who had received the 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. And I was afraid And so I went and hid your talent in the ground. Look, you now have here what is yours. But his Lord answered and said to him, You wicked, lazy servant. You knew that I reap where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed. So you ought to have deposited my money with the bankers, and at my coming I would have received back my own with interest. So take the talent from him. Give it to him who has 10 talents. Verse 49, for to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have abundance. But from him who does not have, even what he has, will be taken away. And cast the unprofitable servant into outer darkness. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And I only read one of 3 stories in Matthew 25. You see, you got the middle of the sandwich. You got the parable of the talents. But we can't miss, we shouldn't miss what comes before and what comes after. You see, Jesus had told a parable about 10 virgins, and you know 5 were wise and 5 were foolish. And if I understand, a common point that Jesus wanted to get across was, listen, the Lord's coming back and you don't know when. And you need to be ready. You need to be prepared. Okay, Lord, I get it. We need to be sober. We need to be watchful. And so we need to be ready and be prepared. But what does this readiness look like? Well, the parable of the talents, it's not passive waiting. And so when Jesus said you got to be prepared, he's now going to tell us something about being productive in the parable of the talents. But he doesn't stop there. So if I'm supposed to be prepared and in a condition always of readiness, understanding that I'm a steward and I will one day give an account, and I want to be wise and I don't want to be foolish, then this is not a passive waiting. This is an active service. This is me doing something. This is me being engaged in doing business on some level. And so there is to be a spiritual productivity about me and in my life, because I'm a steward and I will give an account. But Lord, are you done? Well, no. And you got the great judgment throne. And there's a time of separation. See, the Lord will come back. So what does the preparedness and the productivity look like? What is the heart of a steward who sees himself and herself as a steward? A disciple following Jesus. Well, Jesus says there's going to be a time of separation. And I'll do the separating, by the way, Jesus says. Sheep from the goats. And the sheep are my people. The sheep have been serving me. And one of the ways the sheep have been serving me, being spiritually productive, making use of what I've entrusted to them, is by doing good and being compassionate and how they see other people and serve other people. They're hungry, that are naked, destitute, in need. And sometimes I think that we miss the overall teaching that Jesus wants us to see in Matthew 25 when we only get one of the stories. Now, you're only getting one of the stories this morning because you want to be here 30 minutes and not 2 hours. Am I giving God my best? Am I giving God my best? And I know that's a question that only you can answer for yourself. I can't answer it for you, and I shouldn't even try. Because, see, you're not going to stand one day and give an account to me. I am not your judge. But the Lord, who is the righteous judge, will call each one of us to give account. Have you done your best? Have I done my best? So let's unpack this parable of the talents as we end this year and enter into a new year. What is the Lord really looking for? I mean, the best me I can be, giving God my best. What is the Lord really looking for? I'll tell you. Jesus does. The Lord's looking for faithfulness. He's looking for faithfulness in His servants. You see, to one He gave 5 talents, to another He gave 2, and to another 1. But you see, it's what the Lord gives. He's giving what is rightfully His, and He is entrusting it to us. In this story, in this account, they're called talents, some unit of money. In fact, money is used in the text. There are 3 things that all of us have. And then we'll get to the story about differences. But I want you to start with similarities. I want you to think of the 3 things that everybody in this room has. Without exception, everybody in this room has time, talents, and treasures. Now, we do not possess them in the same amount or to the same degree, but all of us have time. You're alive. All of us have talents. We are presented with opportunities in keeping with our varying abilities, but we all have talents and we all have treasures. Time, talent, treasures. No, we don't possess them all to the same amount, and yes, we have them in varying degrees. But what does the Lord look for in every one of us? He's looking for faithfulness. And at the heart of this, really the whole account in Matthew 25, in every instance, but especially here in this middle story, the issue of stewardship is all over this. At the heart of the issue of stewardship is me seeing myself as having been entrusted with certain things by my Lord, and He expects me to use what He has entrusted to me. He expects me to manage what He has given to me, and He says, Paul, I'll return. I'm coming back one day, and I will call you to give an account of how you have managed the things that I have entrusted to you. That's the issue of stewardship. And look, there are a lot of things, now in varying degrees and not to the same amount. But do we see ourselves as stewards of the gospel? Disciples making disciples. Jesus did a lot of teaching about that. And He says, I've entrusted to you the gospel. How are you using it? How are you representing it? And not just the gospel people. People. I mean, I'm talking to people in this room who the issue of stewardship with you is you've got little ones at home. As a parent, the Lord has entrusted to you the responsibility of caring for, managing these little ones. How faithful, how reliable, how trustworthy am I currently in this area as a mother or a father? As a husband or a wife in relationship to people? Right here as a shepherd in relationship to this and only this local church? Because one day I will be called to give an account. Paul, how did you manage my sheep? How did you take care of my people? And treasures, money. You see, it's not money that's the root of all evil, it's the love of money. That's what Paul told the young preacher Timothy. A man's life, Jesus taught, does not consist in the abundance of the things that he possesses. You can't be a servant of me and your money, Jesus says. So how am I stewarding? How am I managing the resources? financially that the Lord has entrusted to me. We don't all possess the same abilities and we don't all possess the same amounts of money. But the Lord is looking for faithfulness. And He wants to know if He can trust me, if He can trust you with what He has entrusted to you. There were only two. There were three in this account. There were only two that heard the words, "Well done, good and faithful servant." That ought to get our attention. I mean, what do you want to hear in that day of reckoning? You want to hear the words from your Master, from your Lord Jesus Christ, "Well done. You were a faithful servant. I could trust you. I gave you opportunities in keeping with your abilities, and you have shown yourself trustworthy. Can the Lord depend on me?" But our responsibility is according to our ability. Here's where I think we get a little sidetracked, and I don't want to be overly critical. I think the idea of talent we miss because in our day, in the English language, when we hear talent, we think ability. But notice in the parable, Jesus says, verse 15, He gave to each according to his own ability. So talents here are not necessarily abilities. I think we should see this in relationship to opportunity. Ability plus opportunity, there's your responsibility. And again, the ability varies. And so the opportunities are not the same. And so the responsibility is not equal with us all. But the common thing that we all share is that we have responsibility on some level. It's not passive waiting. Neutrality is not an option. This parable certainly illustrates for us the concept of doing nothing will not work. Dallas Willard has some good things to say. He talks about, and I quote, how it is a great burden to be gifted and yet not have the character to bear it. Did y'all hear that? A great burden to be gifted, but yet not have the character to bear it. That's pretty deep, folks. But the Lord talks about this here in Matthew 25. See, the one talent man, he had it taken away. Is it possible, this is what I'm asking, is it possible that someone is loaded with ability and so they have greater opportunities and so they have greater responsibilities and yet they have ignored the massive amount of opportunities and abilities that they have, and they haven't tried to grow what the Lord has given them. They haven't properly managed what the Lord has entrusted to them, and the Lord's going to take it away. I'm concerned about servants, especially those in positions of ministers of the gospel and those in positions of leadership that have a great amount of gift or gifting. But to be quite honest, the Lord knowing what I don't know, the Lord reading hearts and I can't read hearts, they don't have the character to bear it. They're lazy, indifferent, selfish. See, we have responsibilities. I used to read this parable. I used to hear sermons from men who would preach from this parable. Not my dad, to be fair. And I'd walk away from this sermon thinking, wow, where's the justice in this parable? Where's the fairness in this parable? Well, it's all over it. He gave to the 5-talent man, or one man, 5 talents. And he gave to another 2. And he gave to another 1. See the fairness of the Lord here. He does not hold us accountable for what we're incapable of doing. But we do have responsibility to trust Him. We do have responsibility to be content with what He's entrusted to us and understand that there's something that He expects from us in doing business and engaging ourselves. That's the Luke 19 parable of the minas. Very similar, by the way. Do business. Be engaged. Take some initiative. Trust me. Be content with what I've entrusted to you. Do the best you can with what you have. I guess the point here is, from this parable of the talents, hey, Paul, are you really currently living up to your potential? And in order to answer that question, I've got to ask myself, what are my talents? What opportunities are presented me? Am I seizing them? Are you currently, have you been in this year 2024? Have you been really living up to your potential? Has God really gotten from you your best? You can't give more than you can give. But see, the Lord knows. That's not my place to judge. But He knows. He knows because He's the one that gives. He's the one that opens doors. He sees sometimes things that we don't see, maybe because we don't want to see them. You look at the 1-talent man and how he's described. I know it's not enjoyable, but it's in the text. Lazy, wicked, unprofitable, or maybe your translation has useless. Really? I mean, you would think those are terms like wicked, evil. That's what you would expect the Lord to say of some rebellious, obstinate person who's immoral and knows they're immoral and sinning without conscience day after day after day. And you would look at that person who is not in line with the Word of God, in rebellion to the will of God, who understands and yet doesn't care. And the Lord would say, listen, when you call to give an account, you're evil and you're wicked. But here's just this guy who, he buried it. And he said, look, Lord, what you gave me, I get to give back to you. And the Lord said, you could have at least gained interest from it. Why does the Lord refer to him as lazy and wicked? I think it's in the text. He did nothing when he could have and should have done something. In keeping with the ability and the opportunity, he was not responsible. And the Lord, who can see and know and will one day judge, looked at this 1-talent man and said, without excuse, what you were given is taken away from you, and you will be cast into outer darkness. He offered excuses, though. Did y'all notice that? We do that, by the way. Oh, come on. We do that. You're not any different from Moses. We do that. But excuses don't work with the Lord, because the Lord knows everything about us. He said, I was afraid. Does fear sometimes keep you from making good use as a steward with what the Lord's given you? Does fear keep us sometimes from taking risks, taking initiative, doing something? Now, by the something, I don't mean just get outside the will of God and go to work. But sometimes fear. And a wrong view of our master, the Lord, makes us no different from the one-talent man. I mean, how do we see our master? As a cruel, harsh, unfair, expecting too much kind of Lord? The reason I submit this because it's in the text, and I think it's in the text to illustrate for us that sometimes I can be guilty of inactivity and not being productive because of excuses that I make in relationship to how I see my Lord. And the one-talent man failed because he played it safe. He could have done better. He could have done more. He had the ability and the opportunity. He just squandered it. So how should we end? I think how the parable ends on the concept of accountability. That day will come. You see, the text says he went on a long journey. I don't know when he's coming back. But he is coming back. And in the parable of the talents, when he came back, he settled accounts. It was a time of accounting, of reckoning. And such will be the case when the Lord comes back for each one of us, or when we stand in judgment, or when our life on this earth ends. I'm not a math guy. That's why I married an accountant. But my math is, I think, good enough to crunch the numbers. 5 talents, gained 5. 2 talents, gained 2 more. 1 talent, nothing. If you just group them together and they get to collectively give an account, did really well, right? As a group, they did really well. Lord said it doesn't happen that way. You can't be that guy that says, I'm going to ride the coattails of someone else who was very generous, very responsible, very concerned, very compassionate, seizing opportunities because they saw opportunities. See, because the reckoning, the accountability one day is an individual accountability. And I want to say this and be heard. We ought to thank God that it's that way. But we will one day give an account. And I don't need to be that kind of person that says, well, preacher, you don't understand. See, I would do more if. That's not how the Lord sees it. You see, it's not I would do more if I had more. The Lord's asking me, Paul, what did you do with what I gave you? Why would you ask me in prayer to give you more when you haven't shown yourself reliable in the little or the few that I've already given? While we will not be equal in ability, and while we will not be equal in achievement, this parable teaches that we can be and we should be desiring to be equal in effort. And I want you to just let that simmer. I've grown up my whole life reading good books and hearing from godly men speak about the 80-20 principle, where you got 20% of the people doing 80% of the work. That's not here. Now, I may be part of the problem. Lord, show me, teach me, lead me. Time, talent, treasures, not the same amount, not to the same degree. But what is common, we all should be giving effort on some level. Here's my concern, and I'm done. I really am done. I promise you. I'm not going to get down on the floor and go more. Here's my concern when I preach on this. My concern is after preaching on this sermon that there will be a few who walk away feeling guilty that the Lord doesn't want to feel guilty because He considers you faithful. What you once were doing and doing with right motives from a pure heart, you simply cannot do anymore. And the Lord doesn't expect you to do what you once did. And it doesn't mean you're not valuable, not important, not useful, not of benefit to the body. Quite to the contrary. And it's genuine, or generally, it's the people who are so sensitive to the concept of stewardship and have such noble hearts that tend to sometimes walk away feeling guilty when they shouldn't feel guilty. Maybe I haven't been giving enough in my finances, even though I'm very limited now, and I wasn't 10 years ago, 5 years ago. Or I used to do this with the ability, or I used to have this ability, and I just don't have it anymore. And it wasn't that the Lord took it away from you because you were inactive and apathetic, and it's just life has happened. And the body's not the same, and the mind is not the same. And I want you to see in this account that the Lord has in His mind to say to you, well done. You were good and faithful. But perhaps a greater concern I have is when we read the words of Jesus, and I share this account with us, there will be those who will listen and not feel guilty, who should feel guilty. And sometimes Jesus teaches some very hard things because He intends to thin the ranks. Or He says some things that we need to hear even though we don't really want to hear it, because He wants to prepare us for that day of accounting. You see, I can be the one talent guy. I can be faithful to my wife. I can live a moral life. I can tell the truth. I can study my Bible, and I can preach some really good sermons. And ignore opportunities based upon what the Lord has entrusted to me in finances and ability and time. And I can ignore opportunities to help the hurting, to feed the hungry, to visit those. And I can think I'm a sheep when the Lord says, Paul, you're a goat. You weren't listening to what I said. You weren't really following me. You didn't have my heart for the hurting. That's how Matthew 25 ends. And that ought to scare us to death. The Lord only expects what we're capable of doing. But one day we will be called to give an account. What are you doing with your talents? What are you doing with opportunities? What are you doing with your life? Are you giving God your best? Are you currently living up to your potential? And God gives favor, and He grants forgiveness. And if you're here today and you're in need of either one, if you're in need of forgiveness, ask, learn, change your mind and will, and do better. I just realized I'm preaching and I said I wouldn't do it. Sorry. It's the Lord's invitation. It is not mine. Come to Him. He died for you. He can save you. Confess Him as your Lord. Come in faith, obedient in baptism to have your sins washed away. And if you're in need of His mercy and forgiveness and grace and favor and pardon, ask Him for it. Come with a clean heart and a clean conscience in faith. Come to Him while together we stand and while